Hi, my name is Geraldine Cameron, and I'm a student at FIU, and I will present my project, my research project on the power of gender in small group. Um, I decided to do this research project on this topic because I'm a kindergarten teacher, and I was trying to manage my small group for reading, and I noticed that I was having a really hard time managing the behaviors in that setting. As I looked at some of the reasons that may have been attributing to this problem managing, um, I noticed that there was a disproportion in regards to gender for all of my groups. Um, the way that the groups were set up was using the profiles provided by iReady, which uses six different domains in reading proficiency to evaluate and assign the children to the group where they would benefit the most from the specific type of instruction. So as I was looking at the disproportion within the gender, I thought that this would be a very interesting topic to learn more about. Um, when I began the quest for my research topic, and I started reading more about gender and the way that it not just gender, the development, the emotional aspects, how it affects you know um, how it affects behavior, how it affects children and just society, the how gender influences the influences of gender in society. I realized that this was something very significant that I really did need to explore, and the more I read about, the more I I saw the importance of this research um, for myself and for my colleagues in terms of what we would learn and the implications that we would arrive from investigating this further. Specifically, since many of us use iReady profile to create the groups because as it was suggested by our administrator, and it just we really needed to look further at the impact that 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 gender has on the groups and how we needed to factor this in. Well, um, first of all, let me get started on how the AR project was put together. Um, to understand the effects, I decided that the first thing I would do would be to really review what was going on in this original group. I decided that the best way to do this would be by by studying the groups because of the limited time, by studying the groups for 3 days, um, doing three activities in three different types of structure. Um, I decided to use obviously the iReady profile structure um, because this was what was asked to be used, and this would have been this I decided would be my control. I also decided to study what would be the effects in a single sex grouping, and finally I decided to also study iReady grouping, but using teacher discrepancy to balance out the that group. So I had three groups: iReady profile, single sex group, and iReady balanced grouping. And all three groups were studied for 3 days, doing the same three activities that were on level. The behaviors that I wanted to record were noise level, also participation in terms of uh, completion of the task, and also um, as I was doing my literature research, I learned more about the gender roles, uh, not just the in terms of authority and the type of activities that they do, but also in the language and how they communicate, and the purposes and goals of language as used by different genders. So I decided that this would have been a very important, a great opportunity to learn about it, and definitely a very important aspect of my investigation to include. So I included that, and I also wanted to investigate their their um, their feelings about the different groups. How did they feel in terms of working either with their same gender, with having mixed groups. I wanted to see how the students felt. The research was conducted with full knowledge of my students. I explained to them what I was doing. I explained to them what was the goal of the study, and so they were aware um, of what the teacher myself was doing as I was observing them, and that I was recording their actions. So I felt that I was able to efficiently conduct participatory research. Um, as I did my research, some of the findings that I was able to see throughout, and definitely as I reviewed everything, all my data, um, was that there was definitely a difference between the way that boys and girls participated. And the biggest not the biggest, the most information that I got was really from the data I recorded from the conversations that were going on in the groups. um, as I looked at the type of conversations and the purpose of those conversations, I I started seeing a pattern. Um, One of the first things that I noticed was that girls were more inclined to work with one partner. Um, they really needed to connect to another person. Didn't really have to be a girl. They just needed to connect to one person. Connecting to many people at the same time was something that they did not prefer to do naturally. So it was very hard for them um, to collaborate in groups bigger than two, and it was hard, not that they couldn't do it, but that it was hard because they always wanted to connect to one person. They just wanted to choose one person, just like if, when you're trying to plug in something to an electrical plug, maybe you can only plug one appliance. That's how I saw it. And the boys, it was very different. The boys, they didn't really connect to one person, and they might have done it but very short, a tiny second. They just they kind of connected to the group, but independently. They didn't need that feedback, that front, that intimate connection, that exclusive type of connection. And so what happened in my groups was that I noticed that the boys had an easier time starting a task. The boys had an easier time collaborating because they had less fights in regards to um, creating that intimacy, that partnership, that one-to-one connection. They didn't really seem to need it or want it, and the girls really needed this. They really looked for it, and they would oh, I don't want to use the word waste, because I'm sure that this is an important aspect, but in terms of getting started with the task, it took a very long time until they were settled on who was their partner. They they would not proceed to start working, and this happened in all the types of groups, whether it was single sex or the I ready profile, or or the proportion balanced I ready profile. So I feel like this was a major finding. I was not aware of this, and and it opened up my eyes in terms of how we how we in the different genders, you know, have different needs, social needs, and how we are how we connect to people and the world, maybe in different ways. Um, so this was something very important to me, in terms of findings. I feel like the information that I got from this also helped me understand in my research. One of the reasons why I wanted to research, one of the many reasons why I wanted to research the grouping, was because I had two students. It was the two girls and the one boy, the ones that were kind of felt out of the group. They were very unhappy going into groups. They would go and they would put their head down. Um, they would be bickering with the other members. They would look across the room and kind of look at their friends and be distracted, and it was obvious that they felt like they didn't belong in their groups, and I can see why. I mean, if you're the only one of your gender there, um, it would not be unnatural to feel like you don't belong. And as I started to think about how girls and boys connect, I could better understand why the girls in my groups had a harder time um, participating, feeling like they want to participate in these groups, versus the boy. When the boys worked in the group for the task, it was as if they were working independently, and they were putting in their own product to for the team, for the goal of the team. When the girls were working, they wanted to collaborate. They wanted to create this together. And and so it's, I mean, obviously this does take a longer time to achieve. And to to my understanding, this is a higher level of 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 work. It's a higher is a skill that is hard to achieve than the independent person working and putting in their little contribution. I mean, it takes a lot more work for what the girls were doing than for what the boys were doing. But it really was, the boys were more productive in that sense. In my research, all my students were able to complete the task, but like I said, those differences, I can see how they would be significant as they move into the upper grades. Maybe one of the implications that I felt like I was able to become um, aware of in terms of the grouping and instruction was that I needed to be more explicit in terms of different ways that we can work together. Um, I felt that because we had always worked together, that they would know how to do it. But this gave me an opportunity to learn more about the strategies that they were using for collaboration, and the need for me uh, to give them more instructions on this, so that they knew that they would learn that they have a choice, that they have different ways that they can work together, and perhaps this will make the girls more aware of different ways, that they don't have to just, that there are times that we can have that partnership, and there are times where, depending on the goal, it will be more productive to just collaborate, but do some of the work independently, and then contribute that to the group. um, for my research project, I use quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative data that I used was the number of interruptions, the number of completed tasks. Qualitative data I used was the type of conversations that were used. I categorized them depending on the purpose. Um, all of this data, I felt, really painted a really clear picture of what was going on in my classroom. Um, Other than learning that I have to implement, or rather, I have to instruct my children in different ways that they can collaborate, I feel like it also changes my teaching, because I'm able to better understand um, and deal with some of the issues and the behaviors that were going on in my small group. I was able um, to see that this wasn't just an exclusive thing, but this was rather part of of them finding their own identity and developing their own identity, whether it is as girls or boys, and this is something that is permeated to our society. So this wasn't just exclusive to my classroom. This was really something bigger, that obviously I felt needs my attention, and also that it needs my respect. I need to respect that there are those differences, and to be accepting and tolerant of the different ways that we are developing our sense of community, and our sense of responsibility, and our sense of responsibility within a community, you know, and including or influenced by our gender. Um, the difference between this research project and my last research project is that in both of them I studied gender in a small group. The first time around, I did not do a control group. I was very I wasn't, I think, mature enough to know, wasn't knowledgeable enough to know the importance of it. Also, for this research project, this one that occurred, um, I I explained to my students better what was going on, and I felt like they were more aware, and thus were a bigger part. They had a bigger um, part in this project, because um, they were, I mean, they weren't being studied. They were studying with me, which is, feel, you know, the flag of action research. Um, Also, another aspect was because I had already learned so much before in terms of the literature that I had looked at in my first project. I was able to look at more literature and studied the behaviors with a different mindset. Because the book that we had studied in our class was it really regarded language as as a way to study behavior and thought patterns. Um, I was influenced by this, and I read more on this and on societal structures, and this awareness obviously um, made me more knowledgeable in terms of the types of conversation that in terms of the type of things that I should be uh, paying attention to. And this is why I included the types of conversations, and which was not included in my initial project. For this project, I did include the type of conversations because, um, as McNiff had, mentioned several times, um, it is, I don't know if we want to say it as symptomatic of the thought pattern, or it is an easy way, it's a visual way to see the representation of the thoughts, of what's going on, of the pattern of thoughts, of the process of their thinking. So it really changed the quality of the research. um, I feel like what I've learned has made me a better teacher, and I hope to use what I know now to continue studying, continue with my quest to understand my students better and myself better, and see how I can contribute more to my class and improve, um, not just learning academic, but learning how to um, communicate better, and for my students to learn as well, like how to work better together. Um, After this research project, um, as I reflected on all the things that I had learned, and just really see that there are differences, um, whether they're through nurture or to structure. it it made me think about the importance of respecting differences versus trying to fit everybody into this one square or one group. I feel like, and I feel like, you know, also in terms of my students and their differences in learning, that in gender, it also applies in gender, that we have to not just be tolerant and acceptant, but also be appreciative of these differences. Um, it's not a bad thing to want to connect to one person. It's not a bad thing to want to work independently and, collaborate like that as a group. I think true collaboration, true teamwork, comes from respecting and appreciating these differences, and finding how we can use these to improve ourselves, our society, our classroom. And so I felt like this was very positive, and that was something that I I impart on my kids. I want to make sure that they get that lesson. It's not just about respect. It's not just about saying everybody's the same. It's about actually accepting that we're not all the same, and we all have something special to bring forth, and we need to use our voices to to improve and we all have different voices, and that's just fine. Thank you.